Now, I've been creating stories as long as I can remember, but it was in 2025 where I decided to actually go out and publish my first story, which you guys already know. It was Variant Color's Vampire Killers, and it was not only the first comic series that I published, but it's also the first series to launch my shared universe. So now, some of you guys already watched my videos of me explaining why I enjoy creating stories and decided to become a comic writer. But I haven't really talked about what actually inspired me to create the foundation for the Venus Orion Comics universe. So, where did this fascination come from, and why did I decide to come up with this ensemble cast of characters, and why did I create such a, I wouldn't say a complex power scaling system, but a mechanics that's more akin to something that you would see in RPGs, where I also have different classifications and affinities and strengths and weaknesses of characters. And why does my universe also contain different nations, political factions, religious institutions, corporations, and secret organizations, and of course historical events, which I can't wait to actually dive into when it comes to the Great Samaritan comic series itself. So why did I decide to tell this story within this universe through several different comic book series, which is phase one, the foundation? Instead of following one protagonist, you follow in various different characters that give different perspectives of that very same universe. Well, a major part of that inspiration is for my love of RPGs. Now, I know it probably doesn't come to a surprise with anyone who subscribed to my main channel, which is Mugen Lord, or participated in many of my live streams over the years. I love RPGs. I've been playing them since the SNES era of gaming, or we can go back to the NES if you want to go back that far. I'm already aging myself as it is, but it wasn't long before I understood terms like character development, environmental storytelling, power systems, narrative structures, or world building. RPGs were already teaching me how those things work and how they are structured by laying that foundation. Unlike most video games that I experienced during that era, RPGs had a unique way of pulling me into characters and its worlds. There was one RPG in particular that made me realize that video games could offer something beyond jumping on Goombas, running through levels at high speed, or beating up thugs in the streets. That game was called Secret of Mana on the Super Nintendo. Secret of Mana had a charm, and it immediately connected me with that world and its characters. Before I even had a chance to experience everything the game had to offer, its opening title and soundtrack had already pulled me into this world. That feeling still stayed with me to this very day. I didn't understand why it affected me so deeply at the time. I didn't understand anything about the narrative design or how music, artwork, characters, and exploration could work together to establish the world, but I knew one thing, that the game had taken me somewhere else. And what I wanted to understand is how I could create that same feeling for someone else. Before I knew it, I was sitting down in classrooms or at home creating fantasy worlds and characters of my own. I became a dreamer. And if you haven't checked out that video between dreamer and creator, I suggest you check that out. I know, shameless plug. But it became clear that I wanted to do something greater, or I wanted to go out and create worlds growing up. So I actually became a writer and a world builder myself. But I wasn't thinking about working for a major game company. Even back then, I was already thinking about creating my own mythology, building my own platform, and growing an audience that would enjoy the stories that I had to offer. RPGs was teaching me storytelling long before I understood that I was being taught. Even though Venus Orion Comics is still within the early stages of his life, you can already see RPG philosophies baked into my universe. One of the clearest examples is my approach to the power mechanics, which I highly suggest you check out that video. Before the other comic series even begin to release, you get an understanding how my world functions and the classification of characters themselves. Characters within Venus Orion Comics don't simply possess random abilities that can solve every problem. Their abilities are connected to a larger metaphysical system. There are different wave signatures, classifications, conscience levels, affinities, strengths, weaknesses, and limitations that determine how characters interact with one another. That doesn't mean I wanted to place a literal statistics, experience points, or status screens inside my comics. What I wanted to take from RPGs was the logic behind their combat systems. In a strong RPG, an ability becomes more interesting when you understand what it requires, what's its limits, and how it interacts with something else. A powerful character should not automatically have the answer to every situation. Their opponents may possess an affinity that places them at an advantage. Their abilities may require a resource, carry a physical cost, or force them into approach the battle more efficiently. Those lessons influence how I develop the wave force, wave essence, wave signature, conscious levels, and relationships between Essentia, Nullum, and Varus. And I'm already getting too ahead of myself. As I said before, I suggest you check out their video. They also influence other expressions of power within Venus Orion comics, including Source Gem, Riot Arts, Critical Arts, Fate Arts, which you'll definitely see in Xeno, the Die Star Champion. I can't wait till we get into that fantasy world. Oh my god, I had a fun time writing that script. Most importantly, Venus Orion Comics has a lot to thank to Tetsuya Takahashi and their larger Xeno series, especially when it comes to Xenogears, through his work later on with Xenoblade within Monolith Soft themselves, especially after Nintendo had acquired them. I was 11 years old when Xenogears had released, and that impacted me so much as a young gamer, and it was pretty much a life-changing experience for me at that time. It was the type of experience that pretty much kept me awake at night, thinking about how someone could create a world and establish so much detail within the world itself. It had rich lore, memorable cast of characters, political conflict, as I said before, religion, technology, philosophy, and history much larger than what characters initially understood. As I continue to experience Xeno Saga and eventually Xenoblade, the Xeno series continues showing me how one character's personal conflict could become connected to something much more greater, or I should say cosmic, and that's something that really influenced me. Now, how I think about this stuff when it comes to these categories such as religion and when it comes to the history and consciousness, you'll definitely see a lot of that, especially in Orion Colors Vampire Killers, and especially when you get a chance to get the introduction of the Church of Elohim. And I can't wait until you guys get a chance to deep dive into that faction itself. Oh man, I have so much in store for that, but also keep that in mind. All of them may believe that they understand what is happening within the world itself. A religious institution may even understand something completely different. A government may also possess one part of the truth. There are so many different truths found within the Venus Orion Comics universe that I can't wait for you guys to actually do a deep dive in when it comes to phase 1, the foundation. And a lot of that and those building blocks, that foundation itself, was highly responsible when it comes to the Xeno series. It was very much that inspiration that I've taken from that, because how much it definitely impacted me as a gamer. Like, my characters don't even enter their stories knowing the complete history of existence. Hezekiah begins with a personal search. Siona begins by struggling with her identity as a crossborn. Justin Emmett begins with his sacrifice and what his nation wants him to actually become. And of course, Faith Tanaka begins with the belief in the guardian system that she serves. Their immediate conflicts provide the entry point. But as their stories progress, they begin discovering that the universe is much larger than they originally understood from the very beginning. That is one of the greatest lessons that I learned from Xeno series that really taught me about story writing and developing characters and actually world building. Start with the characters, or build that world, and then you expand with the character itself. And don't get me started when it comes to Final Fantasy, because during the time I created Neodelphia as the central location for Orion Colors Vampire Killers, my greatest real world inspiration was, of course, Philadelphia, where I was born and raised, the city where I was greatly influenced throughout my entire life, from childhood all the way up into adulthood. But there was also a JRPG that definitely influenced that fictional structure for Neodelphia. And as I said before, that major influence comes from Final Fantasy VII. Midgard taught me that the physical structure of a city could reveal who holds power before any character stops to explain it. The city's design communicates class division, and its corporations possesses enough influence to shape how people live. Different sections of the city provide completely different experiences depending on where someone was born and how much access they possess. And then, of course, that thinking influenced how I approach the upper and lower parts of Neodelphia, its different districts, its corporate structures, and even the relationships that citizens would have with the Guardian system itself. I wanted the city's design to pretty much communicate power, control, and actually inequity. I wanted to really capture that. But with Final Fantasy VII, it also reinforces the importance of memorable ensemble casts, and that's very important. That's why the Retributes themselves are going to be that cast that sits in the middle of the shadow war between Third Echelon, the Church of Elohim, and also, of course, the Ashram Order, which is the Vampire Society itself. Then, of course, the more recent inspirations that really took me by surprise, that really got me into my creative mode, is when Cyberpunk 2077 released and the incredible world that Mike Pondsmith had created. Night City reinforced that idea that a city should possess its own identity, and you'll definitely see that when it comes to Neo-Delphia and many other Neo cities that I can't wait to actually reveal to you guys. Its technology affects the culture, its corporations shape opportunity, body modifications influence how people understand humanity within cyberpunk itself. Social inequity affects where people actually live, what they have access to, and how they actually survive. Each area of Night City feels like its own history, population, economy, and relationship with power. And Midgard and Night City felt really real to me, and I was able to take both Night City and Midgard and take my personal experience with Philadelphia itself and mesh them together, and there you go, you have Neo-Delphia. And all thanks to Cyberpunk 2077 and also Final Fantasy VII. And it's not because they were realistic in a traditional sense, but because they felt as though they existed before the protagonist actually entered the story. They could continue functioning even if the main character disappears. That is how I wanted Neo-Delphia and the other Neo cities within Venus Orion comics to feel. I didn't want Neo-Delphia to become a futuristic background where cool looking action scenes happen. I wanted it to feel like a living city with history, political structures and conflicts, social division, corporations, neighborhoods, institutions, and citizens trying to just survive inside a system much larger than themselves. Midgard taught me how a city structure could reveal who holds that power. And Night City taught me how the people beneath that power adapt, survive, and sometimes become part of the system itself. And then, like, Parasite Eve, that's another good thing, another inspiration that really captured my mind when it comes to creating stories, because Parasite Eve made me approach the supernatural horror inside a recognizable modern city differently. What made that experience effective was that the horror wasn't isolated inside a distant kingdom with monsters where they're expected to be, but it entered the streets, institutions, and environments that should have felt familiar. That contrast made the supernatural elements more disturbing. This influence can be seen mostly within Orion Color's vampire killers. The vampires in VK aren't waiting inside an ancient castle separated from modern society. They exist within criminal networks, corporations, nightclubs, institutions, and systems operating throughout Neo-Delphia itself. Police are investigating crimes and disappearances they cannot completely explain. Citizens witnessing the consequences without understanding the supernatural causes behind them. Hezekiah's investigation slowly exposes what has been beneath or operating beneath the city itself. Parasite Eve helped teach me that supernatural horror, which becomes more effective when the world surrounding it still feels real. And I cannot wait until readers actually start exploring not only just VK, but several other supernatural stories within Venus Orion comics that I have yet to announce. One of the more unexpected influences was Scarlet Nexus. What fascinated me about that game was its approach into specialized terms, psychic abilities, government institutions, and combat rules. It made me think more deeply about how my superpower team should function, and giving several characters different abilities wasn't enough. Their powers, personality, responsibility, relationships, and individual perspectives should affect how the group operates. One character may possess raw power, another character may protect the team, another may understand the institution they work for. I didn't want the team to feel like one protagonist surrounded by backup characters. I wanted them to feel like real RPG parties, where removing one party also change how the entire group functions. You can see the philosophy behind the Retributes, Ultra Squad X, and the 8th Omni District, and I can't wait, man. So every member needs a reason to exist beyond having a cool design or ability. They need to contribute something that nobody else can replace. That creates better combat, but more importantly, it creates better relationships and conflicts within the teams itself. Now, anyone who has also followed me on my Mugen Lore channel already knows that, you know, Despite me dunking on Kingdom Hearts over the past few years, despite the jokes and the criticism, I generally actually appreciates what the series has accomplished. Kingdom Hearts made me think differently about interconnected worlds, metaphysical conflict, light and darkness, and long-term mysteries. Its individual worlds maintain their own characters, identity, and immediate conflicts while still contributing to something much larger. And yes, you could thank Kingdom Hearts for this. That was the very core inspirations besides the Xeno series as well. And of course, as I said before, a character may be dealing with a problem inside one world without understanding how it connects to a conflict affecting existence on a cosmic level. And that approach is how it pretty much influenced me when it came to just crafting the universe itself when it comes to Venus Orion comics. A reader should not need to read every comic to just understand what is happening in one series, but if a reader chooses to experience several Venus Orion comic stories, they will begin noticing connections that no single protagonist can see. And I also want to make this important distinction. None of this means that Neodelphia is my version of Midgard or Night City. Wave Force is not another game's magic mechanic. My team are not copying RPG parties and the metaphysical structure that Venus Orion Comics has established. It's not Xenogears, it's not Kingdom Hearts with different terminologies. Inspiration is not taking the surface of something you have that you love and changing its names. It is understanding why that experience stayed with you. It identifies what it taught you and using those lessons to create something with its own identity, mythology, history, characters, and also rules. I didn't want to recreate the RPG I grew up loving. I wanted to understand why they made me fall in love with the storytelling in the first place. But in the end, RPGs taught me storytelling before I even became a writer. Secret of Mana made me want to create worlds. The Xeno series taught me how to build history beneath those worlds. Final Fantasy VII and Cyberpunk 2077 taught me how cities could communicate power and equity and also identity. Parasite Eve showed me how supernatural horror could invade a recognizable modern environment. And Scarlet Nexus changed how I approach teams, abilities, and government institutions. And Kingdom Hearts, of course, made me think about how separate worlds and stories could become part of something much larger. I don't know what I didn't know I was studying storytelling while playing video games or these games in general. I was simply experiencing worlds and characters that stayed with me for a very long time after I turned off the console. And then years later, those lessons became part of the foundation I used for Venus Orion Comics. RPGs gave me the desire to imagine a universe, and becoming a comic writer gave me the opportunity to share that exact universe. So let me know in the comment sections below, what RPGs made you fall in love with storytelling, and what did that game teach you? If you want to watch me continue building the Venus Orion Comics universe, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because the stories I used to imagine while sitting in the classroom are finally becoming real. So this is Brian Howard Blackson Jr. signing off.